There have been many questions raised about Russia's strategy in this war, but one thing that has become clear is that Moscow is paying particular interest to Ukraine's nuclear power plants. One of the first places they secured in this war was the decommissioned Chernobyl plant, only 10 miles away from the border with Belarus. It's the site of the 1986 nuclear disaster. 3.5 decades later, the radiation fallout is still dangerous enough that access is restricted in a 1,000 square mile zone around that plant. And the fallout still impacts farmers as far away as Scandinavia. But Russia wanted Chernobyl back, so they took it first thing. A few days later, Russian forces started a dangerous fire at Europe's largest nuclear power plant in a city located on one of the main rivers of Eastern Europe. My producers are taking pity on you by not making me pronounce it for you, but we've indicated it on this map with the radioactive icon. So Russian forces are now in control of 2 of Ukraine's 4 active nuclear power sites. There were reports last week that workers at this still active plant were being forced to keep it operating at gunpoint. Now there's word from President Zelensky that Russians are advancing towards a 3rd nuclear power plant. But why? MSNBC national security analyst Clint Watts says that part of the reason may be logistics. Have a listen to what he says.
Nearly all nuclear power plants have a railhead. When you have large armored divisions and you have very weak supply lines, it's always great to get a hold of railheads, because if you do, you can move your armor around without consuming so much fuel and moving so slowly.
So essentially, if the Russians run out of fuel as they move in on Ukraine, the railheads at the plant would help the troops move their tanks around without using as much gas. But is there more to it, especially with all the risks that come with staging a firefight at a nuclear facility and keeping troops stationed inside an exclusion zone that's been radioactive for 36 years? What is the motivation behind all that? Here to discuss is Mariana Bujerin. She's a Ukrainian political scientist and a research associate with the Project on Managing the Atom at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. She's also the author of the upcoming book, Inheriting the Bomb, The Collapse of the USSR and the Nuclear Disarmament of Ukraine. Mariana, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Let's talk about the strategic advantage Russia is seeking by controlling Ukraine's nuclear power plants, despite the risks of having to fight in and around them. What is the political, the military calculus at play here, in your view?
Well, I think we have to admit that we don't know fully the motivations of President Putin and his designs on my country. But if I had to guess, then there's 2 different things going on with Chernobyl and with Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Chernobyl very likely was simply on the way. It was on the way to Kiev and on the main route from Belarus to Kiev. And they're just sort of taking and controlling territory and the main nodes that are kind of on that territory. Now, as you mentioned, Chernobyl is a decommissioned plant. It does not contribute to the grid, but it's still one of the most radioactive sites in the world. There's radioactive isotopes in the ground, in flora and fauna, and it is a protected area. You have to be very careful and follow certain safety and security protocols when you operate in that. And we can safely assume that Russian invading force is not very mindful of those protocols. But there isn't a great...
No, please, finish your answer.
So with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, I think there is a strategy to grab a hold of these critical nodes in Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. We have to remember that Ukraine is a country that's heavily dependent on nuclear energy. About 50% of Ukraine's energy mix comes from nuclear. So imagine if you are, after controlling the country, right, if you grab these really strategic civilian facilities, you control sort of the bloodline of the economy, of industry, of civilian supply, customer supply of electricity. So it is, I think, about grabbing and holding on to a control over a country.
And as we mentioned a moment ago, President Zelensky has said that Russian forces are advancing on a 3rd nuclear power plant, a revelation that might initiate panic. Should people be worried? Are these plants, or aren't these plants safer today than Chernobyl was in 1986?
They're most certainly safer today than they were. We, as a community, as an academic community, international organizations, and also operators of the plant, we learn all the time, and we work to improve the safety and security protocols. However, we designed safety and security protocols to the previous incident, right? So something goes terribly wrong, like in Chernobyl or like in Fukushima Daiichi, and we look at that accident and say, okay, what has failed? Where have been points of vulnerability? And we learn from those, and we design the safety and security systems to prevent that from happening in the future. But what we're seeing today is completely unprecedented in history. No safety and security system on a nuclear power plant has been designed to operate in a war zone. Amid a full-scale war where tanks are firing at reactors, bombs are falling, none of these facilities were designed with that in mind. We can't take solace in the fact that these are already quite heavily secured facilities, that there have been very robust and very rigorous safety and security procedures in place. And so it's not really that easy to blow up a nuclear power station or to cause a nuclear incident, a nuclear event. But again, the flip side of that is we are in a war.
Yeah. And Mariana, we're learning that Hi, I'm Mehdi Hasan. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more of the Mehdi Hasan Show by clicking on any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thank you for watching.